Excellent. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay in getting started. You're joining us at the University of Oxford, the Oxford Programme on Sustainable Leadership, for a panel titled Football and Climate Change: Who is Responsible for Embedding Sustainability in Football, or rather Football's Sustainable Transition. Thanks everyone joining us online here as well. My name is Barney Weston. I'm a co-director of Football for Future. We are a charity with a mission to build a more environmentally sustainable culture in English football. We do this in two ways: by raising awareness, just get my slides right, there we go, of the relationship between football and climate change. We do this through educational workshops. We've delivered to over 180 people, including young Londoners and journalists. You can see some of the young Londoners we delivered to here, but we have also delivered to journalists as well. We also report on the relationship between football and climate change. You can check out our social media. And we also work with football players on the subject, inspiring them to speak out, one of whom is with us today, David Wheeler. We'll hear more from him shortly. The other way we fulfill our mission is we support football to become more environmentally sustainable. And we've worked with 2 Premier League clubs on this. And we also work with some non-league clubs. Here's us at Hanwell Town in West London. But enough on that for now. We can introduce our panel. Like I said, I'm Barney. I'm a co-director of Football for Future. We can let the others introduce themselves. David, want to say a word?
Yeah, I'm David Wheeler. I've been a professional footballer for about 10 years now. Played for Wycombe Wanderers at the minute, and played for QPR, Portsmouth, MK Dons, and Exeter in the Football League. Lost track of how many games I've played, like 300 or 400 games. And so, yeah, I've sort of come into this, like, over the years, sort of probably like most of you, gradually got more and more interested and passionate about the subject. Looking at what I can do on a personal level initially, and then getting to that point where, okay, how can I have more of an impact? And I guess this is sort of the next stage for me, is being involved in sustainability within the industry that I have, most expertise in, I suppose. So yeah.
We can hear from Emma.
My name's Emma. I am the Football Development Officer for Women and Girls at Surrey FA. Surrey FA is basically the regional version for the Surrey County of the FA. So my whole job role is around participation, increasing the number of women and girls playing, and within our development team we all have different focus areas. We don't have anyone specifically at the County FA that looks after sustainability, so myself and the male lead kind of lead on it, and that's kind of how I got involved in it. It's just a personal interest in the topic, and looking at how the role County FA can play in that, basically.
And finally, Louise Downey.
Hi, thanks, Barney. I'm Louise Downey. I'm Senior Sustainability Advisor at West Sussex County Council. And I'm coming from almost the other point of view from my fellow panellists, where my background is in sustainability. That's my job. But I don't know much about football. However, I do see football as a fantastic way of reaching into the community, and actually talking to people about climate change and sustainability from a completely different perspective from you, and actually really engaging them with it. So that's where I'm coming from. And from the County Council's point of view as well, that's fantastic to do, because we're all about ensuring that we improve our communities, and football is at the heart of most communities in our area. So
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. For those online, I'll be joining you. You'll be able to see me in a second, because currently the camera's just on these guys, but we're just going to have a bit more of a presentation. So what then have we got? A professional footballer, a non-profit, a council, and a county FA together to talk about? Well, of course, we'll let Marie in. There we go. Of course, it's nothing less than football, and specifically its relationship with climate change. You might not have heard those 3 words together before: football, climate change, but there is an interrelationship between them. And before we go into answering the question of who's responsible for embedding sustainability in football, we can first have a look at what that interrelationship is. The headline stat is this: a quarter of professional league clubs in England are at risk of being flooded on a regular basis by 2050. In the Premier League, they include Norwich, Southampton, Chelsea, and West Ham. But you don't have to look ahead to 2050. Tadcaster Albion in Yorkshire has been flooded 6 times in the last 2 years. They share a ground with Leeds United women's team. And for those that like to just have a kickabout on a Sunday, the average grassroots football pitch in England already loses 5 weeks a season to bad weather, and a third of those pitches lose between 2 and 3 months in a season. But football is not an innocent victim in this interrelationship. Football also contributes to climate change. And a good way of thinking about this is through the prism of a match day. So let's imagine you're on your way to a game. The majority of football's carbon emissions stem from the travel options they provide fans. Of course, we can say fans as individuals need to walk, cycle, take public transport, etc. But we can't say that when there might not be even a local rail station or bike racks at the stadium, or when kickoff times are moved to inappropriate times because of broadcasters. But moving past that, you arrive at the stadium and you want a pint. You wait at the bar an unusually long time and you order your drink. What kind of cup does it come in? Is it reusable, meaning the cup pay for it to be washed and used again? Is it recyclable? Great, but does the club even have recycling bins? Do they recycle their waste? And then when you get into the stadium, the energy used to power the ground, to light it up, to play music, to heat your food, is it even from a renewable source? It all adds up, specifically to a carbon footprint the size of Tunisia. And that's not even considering the beautiful game's environmental impact beyond carbon emissions, a lot of which I've just touched on. So there is a clear need for football to step up, and football has the influence to do this. It's already taken action on several other social issues in the game. And that's not to say that it hasn't on climate change either. There's already some players up here who've spoken up on the need. Kai Havertz at Chelsea organising a fundraising campaign in response to the flooding in West Germany in last summer. Hector Bellerin buying shares in Forest Green Rovers, Mo Salah presenting the Earthshot Prize, etc. So there is a clear need for football to step up and to address the issue at hand, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So I think as a start, we can talk about where everyone's at already. The other thing about this is we're not, we're very pleased to have all new voices here. David's already done some work with us, we're lucky to say. But we're not judging anyone on this. We're keen to bring new voices into the conversation. So we want to talk about how everyone's got to where they've got to on this point, and what help they need to go further, and what help they can provide others, and therefore answer who's responsible for embedding environmental sustainability in football. So I think we can probably maybe hear first from Emma at Surrey County FA. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your journey in Surrey County FA's journey. How did you end up addressing the question of environmental sustainability?
So I'm fairly new to post. I don't know how long I can say that. I started in November, and on my second day, I kind of had a meeting with our CEO to be like, who's looking after sustainability, and then she kind of said like no one. We're in the process of creating a new 10-year strategy, and sustainability has like a tiny sentence at the bottom of it with no other context to it. And as I said at the start, like it's no one's role within the county FA, all county FA is really to look at sustainability. So how the county FA works is we get funding from the FA and put against KPIs. So our focus areas are discipline, development, and like the business. So football development, which is the primary focus of the county FA, really. We're all about like governance and developing the game. We have different focus areas, but so members of staff look after different areas, but sustainability isn't one of them. And the only reason we're really doing anything at the county FA is because we just have a few proactive staff members who have a passion for making change and doing things better. And we're sort of pushing things forward. I know there are certain county FAs who are doing the same as us or doing even better than us, and there's some county FAs who it's not even a conversation, but it's sort of down to proactive people to start that conversation rather than anyone's job role, unfortunately. And I guess it all comes down to like budget. and where that budget is, where the county FA feel the budget is best spent, and if our general targets and KPIs are all around development, that's where the money will go. And unless we sort of shout about why sustainability should be part of that and a big part of that, they're currently not. It's just not on the radar.
Interesting. And then you mentioned there that you were the first to. Did you schedule in that meeting as well to talk about environment? That came from you as a member of staff too?
Yeah, so there was one other guy before I'd started who had already had a conversation about it, and when they had their original strategy meeting, it got brought up and he was quite vocal around it. But the conversation initially, from when I started, was me proactively going to my CEO and saying, let's have a conversation.
And I think that's quite common. It's often individuals within organisations who are then going to their bosses or leadership and saying that, you know, we need to be doing something on something like this. Louise, how did you find West Sussex County Council's journey was on this issue?
Well, in terms of sustainability and responding to climate change, obviously we're in a slightly different position in that I mean, we've been working to reduce our carbon emissions for a decade or more, but then in response to calls from residents to be responding to the climate crisis, the council noted the climate emergency, passed a motion to try to reach net zero by 2030 for its own operations, and that was in 2019, and then developed a climate change strategy and developed a carbon management plan so that we had a framework within which to work and which to understand the actions that we needed to take. And then, you know, my role sits within that. Then my role is to take forward the climate change strategy and work across the organisation to do that. So we've got the framework and the people, if you like, on the ground to take that forward in a different way. And beginning to start to get budget to do work as well. Not obviously as much as we would like, because the council's, you know, got very stretched budgets and it, you know, masses of big statutory responsibilities to take care of. But that we are making some good progress, I think. We're certainly starting to make the right steps. But there's masses more to do.
It's interesting because you know, obviously you're not a football exclusive organisation, right? County Council's got, well, you know, thousands of more responsibilities than that. But yet you've therefore been acting on the issue so quite in advance, but budget is still a problem to actually unlock core activities to work on this still.
Yeah, I mean, irrespective of football as well, you know, just in terms of acting on climate change for the whole of the council's operations and for all of the services that we deliver, and, you know, looking at everything that our residents and local organisations do across the county, you know, there's a huge hill to climb and very limited budget with which to do that. So we've got to be quite clever, really. But I think one of the strengths of the council is that it's embedding climate change in everything that it does. So every interaction that we have across the area, all the partnerships that we make, all of the connections that we make across local groups and so on, in theory, should now be having climate change embedded within them and environmental sustainability, even if it's about something that you wouldn't perhaps 10 years ago have thought had, you know, climate change related to. It relates to everything, and football and, you know, community cohesion and developing young people in the community and engaging communities and enabling them to work effectively through things like football and making football environmentally sustainable. It all gets wrapped up in a package effectively now, as opposed to seeing these things as silos that aren't connected to one another.
Such a gap, isn't there, between when we first have an issue kind of come onto our radar and then for it to be embedded into all of our activities and to be taking action on it as well. I'm reminded of a quote by David King that's all about it takes 4 to 5 years for, you know, the next 4 to 5 years for us now are crucial because we need to have that, it builds in that time to take action. So, but I think that, you know, at the same time then that, you know, on the other side, you know, football's coming to this quite, you know, if there's work on this 10 years ago, you know, I remember being taught about climate change when I was at school. But if football's now coming into this, perhaps there is room to quickly, you know, turn things around. It's not the final whistle yet. So speaking slightly from a less of an organisational point of view then, David, as an individual, can you tell us more about your own journey as a player on this issue?
Yeah, I think you know, through my own journey, I just became known within whatever team I was playing for as, you know, this odd guy that was you know, giving people grief about, you know, having a throwaway coffee cup at lunch, and you know, that sort of thing. I was sort of you know, tapping on people's consciences, and it'd be like, oh, you know, Wheeler's at it again, sort of thing. Just so it was a little bit, you know, that sort of feel about it, where people understood that I was passionate about it, and potentially they would slightly change their behaviours out of, you know, respect for me in a sense, but not necessarily because of the issue as a whole. And I think, you know, I got to a point where I was like, okay, you know, just telling people, just sort of nudging for other footballers on their behaviours isn't really going to make that much of a difference. So then after that, it was sort of getting in touch with, say, Football for Future or other charities that were doing good work in, you know, on this issue, and being like, oh, how can I help? How can I lend, you know, my platform as a current player to put forward these issues, which I think has definitely helped. But yeah, I think the other thing is putting yourself out there and speaking to staff and officials within football clubs, who, you know, they'll come and chat to me after a game and be like, oh, good game, you know, like, you know, chat about how the game went. But when I've sort of approached these people, you know, say it's the chairman of the club, or you know, the sports scientist, or whoever, you know, or one of the secretaries or whatever, and just say, oh, you know, could we do this better at the club? Could we get a water fountain rather than go through, you know, thousands of water bottles every day? Just little things like that. And people now, I think we had the conversation earlier that it might not have been the case 10, 15 years ago, but people now are very receptive to that. There's people that work within the football club like, yeah, let's try and do that. Like, that's a good thing to do. Let's try and do that. And although it can be painfully long, how long these things take to get past. When it's done, you're like, all right, it's done now. We're not going to go back now to what we were doing before. So when it's done, you're like, oh, that's good. I made not made that happen, but I helped make that happen. So that's where I am now, I guess.
I think as well you pick up on something, you know, what we're certainly a lot of our experience working with organisations is that it's often individuals within a club or county FA or council or you know, a squad that might mention something, and that kind of often is one of the first dominoes, because you know you're just so wrapped up, I think, in the day-to-day business, particularly of football, where it's, you know, fixture to fixture, week to week, you know, and if you're fighting a relegation or promotion, or, you know, just survival generally, and it's hard to think about this sort of stuff. So I think there is definite proof to when an individual does speak up on this issue as well. So thinking about now where we're all at, and you know, we've established that there's a baseline of action amongst us. I do think it's still important to reflect that, you know, football in some ways, and I don't know what you guys think about this as well, you know, it's still not, you know, really far ahead on this issue. There's still, you know, I mean, you've mentioned how Surrey County FA doesn't have a sustainability strategy. I don't know fully, but I don't think Wycombe Wanderers has got anything fully in place. It took 10 years for West Sussex County Council to be having budget behind activities on this issue. So there, and you know, we've spoken about the severity of it. So there is still a need to act on this. So if we then just to ground that in something, if we then think about where you've got to now on this journey, what help do you feel like you need now to go to kind of the next step or to do more? What do you find are the barriers? I think we've already spoken about some of them. Emma, I don't know if you take this on.
Yeah. I think number one biggest one is budget. Also, like, perceptions within football, like some people, it's kind of that thing of, oh, it's not really my problem still. So yeah, they're the sort of two biggest ones. In terms of budget, like we at the moment where we need to prove why we need budget for it. So we're running this season. We're running some activities, like for example on Earth Day on Friday. We're running like an afternoon. We're getting some primary school kids down and doing some football with them, but then doing some Earth Day activities and making them aware, solely for the reason to prove why we need budget to do more things like that. And as I said, unfortunately, our prime target and mission is all about participation and governance of football for players, coaches, referees, whatever it is. That is our mission, and I think we have a much bigger role, could have a much bigger role in terms of sustainability. Like, our reach is massive. In Surrey, we have like over 60,000 players, over 4,000 teams. So every week we reach so many people. Maybe not us directly every week, but playing football is massive. And think about that nationally, on a grassroots level, football is huge. And we could be doing so much more. Generally about education, really. But if we had budget to then go out into communities, into grassroots clubs and help them to educate their coaches or players on the small things, that would make a huge difference. But we don't have that budget at the moment. So that is kind of where we're stuck. And hopefully, if we can prove it now in our 10-year strategy, which will be released before the end of next season, hopefully, if we can prove why we need it, which we do, it could play a massive part in the strategy and in the budget for next season as well. Ultimately, the dream would be it's someone's sole job. So if my role is football development officer for women and girls, it's someone's job as development sustainability or whatever, like with the county council, right? That would be the dream, but it's just having the funding for that.
So, like when you say you prove its worth, or the reason for doing it, it just seems like, so obviously you're not having to explain to people that there is a climate crisis.
No, of course,
So
it's more like to prove to the board and the whoever's in charge that it's the county FA's responsibility rather than anyone else's. So like, we can't necessarily dictate the governance or we can't dictate what clubs do day in, day out. So it's like what role the county FA play in governance of clubs and players and referees, whoever. That's more what it is.
Understanding what football's responsibility is, right? And I think that's where it comes back down to what I spoke about there in that presentation about taking action on these other issues, and there's room for it to take action on this, but also more broadly, over half the world's population of football fans. Football, the Premier League is the most consumed domestic sports league in the world. There's so much room to be able for football to have a role in this, and and then not just in terms of comms and raising awareness, but also as in terms of operations. I mean, several clubs' carbon footprints, not calculating them, etc. There's real role for this. You spoke there about. I mean, it sounds, just reflecting on what you said as well, it sounds so frustrating. And when you think about individuals within organisations, that then kind of in ways that have been responsible to lead this, because you can have your colleagues or bosses, etc., turn back around to you and say, okay, so what? You tell me. I think, do you find that to be the case at all? And what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. It's a tricky one. There's lots of. I feel like there's so many barriers with it. Like Birmingham and County FA is a really great example. They're doing a really good job of being really proactive. And Surrey, we kind of like to think that we're following suit. As I said, there's loads of county FAs that don't necessarily have anyone in that field at all. Even that conversation's not happening at all. So yeah, I think there's a massive scope.
Absolutely. You mentioned something else there as well. It was all about this budget, and you mentioned at the start as well that a lot of the county FA's budget comes from the FA, and then you then have to assign KPIs to meet those, etc. So is it kind of if we come back to the question of who we need help from, is it kind of for county FAs? Is it a question of that arrangement changing? The FA taking some action on this?
Yeah, definitely. I think they have supposedly they have like a sustainability team that work, but I think it's primarily within like Wembley and like their own sites, and I don't think they. So yeah, as you said, like the way we work is we get a budget and it's assigned to certain KPIs, and each member of staff or whatever area you're in will get a certain amount for participation, for example. So yeah, that if that became a KPI and we need to meet a target, then definitely we can put money towards it. We are also a charity as well, so we could do fundraising and source our own money that could go towards that. 100%, that could be an option. But yeah, if it came from the FA in terms of money that they give us, it would have to be against the KPI.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and that's we were just a bit too late to get a national representative here, but I think there is room for that kind of conversation amongst national bodies, and not just the FA, but also government too, thinking about the role that sport can play in tackling climate change. So thanks for that, Emma. On another kind of organisational note, West Sussex County Council, of course, it's not just with football, but if you were thinking about starting activities in that area, I can imagine it's the same problem, budget again.
Budget, absolutely. I mean, budget is the number one problem for any of this. But I think, yeah, there's masses we could do if there was a budget for it, but we'd also then have to have the responsibility and given to us or we'd have to take the responsibility for taking forward certain aspects of delivery in football or other sports. At the moment, we don't have a direct responsibility for delivering anything through sport other than our public health responsibilities. So that's more about getting people active, getting people involved in sports for physical and mental health and so on. And then we've got statutory responsibilities around helping people to live independent lives and being active and healthy in that way too. But we don't have a responsibility for enabling particular sports organisations to be sustainable. We do work with businesses and organisations around developing green skills and transferable green skills and helping organisations to be more sustainable. So we've got grants, for example, that we're doing at the moment to help organisations to become more energy efficient. So that's actually an area where potentially clubs, who are organisations, could benefit. They can get the funding and
Why don't they currently?
I think possibly it's relatively new, the particular scheme, but also it's about finding out about it and thinking it's relevant to you as an organisation. Perhaps
So that
all
is
organisations maybe in West Sussex, perhaps they haven't seen themselves as, perhaps they don't know about it, perhaps they don't know that they're eligible. So things like that could be really great. And as a council, we've got a platform from which to speak and connect and make sure that we spread the word about these things as widely as possible, so that as diverse a range of organisations can benefit from them. So there are opportunities to find money. So one of the roles of the council could be to help organisations to find pockets of money for doing. But I think it needs that sort of coordination of an umbrella organisation like the FA or somebody to help clubs to come together and learn from each other as well. And county councils as well can help with that too. It's about kind of bringing people together, getting that networking going, so that each club doesn't have to act by themselves and do, understand and have all the knowledge themselves as well. So I think knowledge is a huge barrier. It's a huge barrier to any organisation taking forward action on sustainability. So they might have a desire or a target that they've set themselves for achieving net zero by 2030, but no real knowledge of how to get there. And so suddenly they potentially might take actions, but not necessarily understand the unintended consequences of those actions too. So I think money and knowledge are big barriers. One of the things I do in the county council is I teach carbon literacy, which is a recognised qualification, and it focuses sector by sector. So you can see a sports sector carbon literacy course being a fantastic tool to help people in that sector really dig into what that sector needs specifically, what actions need to be taken forward to make that sector more sustainable. Because we're all talking kind of quite generally about sustainability, but actually my lack of knowledge about football comes out here. I don't necessarily know what football would need, but it's going to have very specific needs, and the experts in that sector are probably the best ones to draw those out. if they have the background, foundational knowledge in sustainability to do that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points you're touching on there. One about, and you as well, Amber, about the diversity of stakeholders in the football ecosystem, right? I mean, how many clubs are there? You might just think on a Premier League basis, but, you know, it comes right down to a grassroots level as well. You know, how many different forms of connections that we hold to football. You know, it's kind of countless in England. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there for a national umbrella organisation, like you said, to kind of like, you know, take this and lead the way on it. And the other thing you mentioned about, you know, knowledge. I think the thing about, because there's two sides of our work, like I mentioned about sustainable operations. You know, that stuff, like you might have an immediate increase in your energy tariff. There's the business case to say that, you know, this will save you long term. But I think that's the other side of our work, raising awareness. You know, it's much cheaper, you know, to be delivering education, you know, generally. And I think that's that might be a way of making progress generally in the sector. And that is where the sector's at, because, you know, we don't understand so much the relationship between football and climate change, and again, why football needs to act, you know, specifically. So David, to come back to the original question again, what support do you feel, what's your reflections on all that? What support do you feel you need in your role as well? I think from a club perspective, from a football perspective, I think that football is pretty compromised because of it being competition, and competition and being the best is usually quite closely aligned with how much money you have. Like if you put up a table of how much money a club has compared to what their finishing position is in the league, it's almost identical. It's very, very close. So they're very compromised in that respect, because if you had, you know, like an oil state, or, you know, a billionaire that's, you know, earned money on gas or whatever, they're going to say yes, because it's like the more money we have, the more better players we can buy, the better chance we are going to win these trophies. So they're very much compromised in that respect. And I think the other problem is that the governing bodies like FIFA, UEFA, FA, the PFA, they're sort of beholden to the clubs and to the players. So the PFA essentially a service, like they're the union for the footballers, so they just provide services for the players essentially. And I guess the governing bodies are sort of like that in a sense for the clubs. So they don't really want to upset that relationship. So they don't necessarily want to be telling the clubs, you need to do this, because there's a friction there with that relationship. So I think that's where players have a really big role they can play in terms of being within the club and having relationships with, say, you know, being on first name terms with the chairman, or being, you know, friends with, you know, the CEO or whatever, and just say on offhand, oh, what we're doing about X. So you go right to the top and say, oh, what can we do? So they have a good role there to play, aside from, you know, being on Twitter or Instagram or whatever and just putting out your opinions on it. But I think that it's gonna. I feel like it's definitely a bottom-up thing rather than a top-down thing. I feel like the fans are going to be the ones inevitably will make it so that, like, the levy will break at some point, and there'll be so much fan pressure on the clubs to make that difference and to make that change. And I think the question is that, I mean, it can be both. You know, it doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, of course, but the question is, how do you get to the fans? You know, because essentially fans are just like, you know, like part of the community. Like, it's a pretty good reflection on what the community is. So how do you get the fans sort of, you know, parallel about, okay, is it our problem? Well, if you support your football club, if you support Brighton or Liverpool or whoever, you want to be proud of what your club's doing. So, you know, let's make our club better at this. And there are various ways you can do that, I think, and that's sort of partly what we're exploring, I think, at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Well. You know, we can talk more about that. Oh yeah. Sorry, I've got a question here as well.
Sorry, I just had a question. You mentioned kind of the difference between grassroots versus top down. But do you think, I know that it might not be so much in the kind of remit of this discussion, but also like looking at that international level and looking at organisations like UEFA, if you think about the World Cup, it's going to be held in Qatar, and I'm not sure if this is true, but there's something like they've built 8 or something fully air-conditioned stadiums, and you think these are absolutely ginormous buildings and they're terrible for the environment. And do you think that, I was just kind of thinking, do the actions of these like massive, if this isn't a massive red flag for people in these international organisations, does that not limit what grassroots kind of what you guys can actually contribute, when actually the international organisations, it's clearly not that much on the agenda for them if they are allowing this and it's like are using that much energy kind of unnecessarily? So like, how do you think that fits within this discussion? Because I think that's probably quite an important kind of issue, I guess, at that scale.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is definitely a big parallel with government. I think, you know, there's definitely frustrations when you look at, say, COP26, and you know, we talked a good game, and then you know, when the energy strategy came out recently, it was like, okay, there's not much here on insulation, there's not much here on helping people out of energy bills, there's not much here on, you know, moving away from fossil fuels. If anything, it was like, okay, we're going to try and explore for more oil and potentially look at more fracking. So I think there's a parallel there with the frustrations with like the Qatar World Cup and like thinking, oh well, we could do all this, but then they go and do that and it just blows it out of the water. And I think, well, for one of the things that we use quite a lot in football is controlling the controllables. So, you know, there's no point in worrying about, you know, what the weather's going to be like, or what ref we've got on that day, or, you know, whether there's an injury on that. Like, we can only control what we can control. So I think that's a big thing, is each individual doing what they can do and trying to influence, you know, their friends or their local community the best that they can, and hope that will have like a ripple effect outwards from that. And
I do genuinely believe as well that there is room for. Yeah, I mean, look, 5 years ago, who was talking about you know, climate change in the en masse way we are now? You know, it happened because of, you know, mass protests we had here in England, because of a, you know, Swedish schoolgirl outside of the Swedish Parliament, all this kind of thing. You know, in way, you know, there's a lot of hope in that, and a lot of miracles, and football is built on miracles. You know, I mean, who ever thought Leicester would win the Premier League, or you know, what was the Real Madrid school over there? I can't remember, but yeah, these kind of miracles. You know, so I know it sounds cliche, I know it sounds a bit, but I certainly working in this organisation, I've come around to believe it, and there is a movement that's happening within football right now that's akin to this, and as a result of those other individuals that have worked elsewhere. Yeah, please.
It's kind of relates to the question before, but I don't know if it's the correct assessment, but it seems like football and sport in general is in quite a unique position where they've almost flown under the radar when it comes to pressure from the public to kind of become more sustainable. So if you look at the Qatar World Cup, not that many people have been talking about how that's actually going to have quite a big impact on the environment. So it's almost a situation where football needs to act, but there isn't much pressure on it. And do you think that gives it a more, then kind of a larger platform to make more change? So say people saw that actually Premier League clubs were making a lot of effort to become more eco-friendly and sustainable without that pressure, would that then have a wider effect on society? If they saw Arsenal were going to, I don't know how they would do it, but no longer take long-haul flights and instead have an alternative, I don't know what that would be.
Right.
But would that then have a greater effect on, you know, individual actions, because of the fact that there isn't really at the moment a big pressure for them to act?
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, if you see big clubs taking substantial action of that sort, that it normalises it. And it's that social norm that we need. because it makes it part of everyday conversation. It makes it something for the fans, people who are invested in that club, and others. It gives them something to be excited about and to aim for, because actually if their club is interested in it, if their club is doing it, then it must be important, it must be them as well. And it just stimulates conversation, and then stimulating conversation about climate change and making it normal to talk about, which it is becoming more normal to talk about, then builds that wide public pressure. And the great thing about football is it kind of touches every demographic of society. There's no sort of particular group of people that it talks to, so it has a reach that even other sports don't have. And for football to be kind of the flag bearer for that and actually making sustainability normal, I think then does create the grassroots call that then the big, big associations, the big events have to start answering to, because they'll actually start seeing their brand affected by it. Because if they're not responding to climate change, it's affecting their brands, that's going to affect their revenue.
And just to build on that as well, I mean, clubs are starting to. A couple of years ago, Arsenal quietly signed up to the United Nations Sports for Climate Action framework. But now clubs are doing it in a public way. They're putting press releases out, and they're making videos back. So they understand that football has influence to be able to reach its fans, people who might be completely turned off by Greta Thunberg or Extinction Rebellion, and to be able to reach them on a new on the subject in a new way. That's not just like some of the same narratives we have about climate change.
So we've got a couple of questions from those who tuned in online. So this one's from Richard Lindsay, who's from Birmingham County FA.
Great.
And this is a question for the council and Surrey FA. He's wondering how much football in the area, or in Sussex or Surrey, is played on council-owned pitches, and perhaps to help educate clubs and reduce their costs, could the council offset the cost of pitch hire for the season based on clubs' tangible commitment to climate action?
Yeah, in terms of the first question, in terms of the number of people, teams or clubs playing on council pitches, it's about 80% of teams don't have their own pitch. So that's a huge amount of people who don't have a clubhouse, so can't make changes to do with the electricity bill, but actually the grass that they play on, they could have some influence. And the cost to play on those pitches is normally done through
It's usually district or borough council.
Yeah. So it's the different districts we play in. But my team, so I coach a team, and it costs about £2,000 a season for an 11-side pitch, just one pitch for 15 weeks. That's a ridiculous amount of money that could be spent on something else. And that money will go towards maintenance or cutting the grass or doing the lines. But if that's an internal cost, which it for the most part sometimes is, to that borough or district council, that they use their own budget to do that themselves. So yeah, definitely that's a huge way to save some money and use that for something more positive.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question actually. Although to just slightly challenge what you said, is that actually the revenue that councils are getting from renting out these spaces then pays for a lot of the maintenance of those spaces, because the councils haven't got a budget to spend on it otherwise. So, but I think there's definitely something in understanding how you can recognise those that are taking action, and in a way that then helps both the council maintain those spaces better, and helps those recognise those kind of actions for the environment. I mean, there's a lot going on at the moment about in the farming sector, in the agricultural sector, about payments for environmental good and so on. I know that's all kind of playing out, but it feels like there should be lots of other ways of recognising financially clubs or organisations that are doing the right thing. So yeah, I don't have the answer, unfortunately, to how we could do that. And I don't know how many in West Sussex are on council land, but I suspect it's fairly similar to Surrey.
Yeah.
Another question?
Yeah, we have one more question here from also Richard is replying, so we might have to go back to that one. We hear you, Richard. So this is from Benjamin Mole, who runs the Sustaining Sport podcast, and he says, how do we address sustainability benchmarking or due diligence? He worries that because football clubs are such strong brands that they are susceptible to being part of greenwashing or sports washing schemes, we perhaps need to help clubs know what sponsors, etc., are actually carbon neutral who they're associating with.
I think it's probably. Well, I think he's answered it partly there, hasn't he? But I think that so the question being there about basically ensuring that if clubs do give carbon footprints or benchmark or this kind of thing, how do we ensure that it's legit? Well, I mean, the crucial thing I think is having an independent organisation that can work on this. Of course, we're one of them, but there is also out there the Sports Positive League table, which ranks clubs according to how sustainable they are, and they're obviously independent as well. So I think having a sense of independent on this as well is really important. And of course, we're also talking on the issue of independence about a regulator in football at the moment, and there is potentially room for environmental sustainability to be within their remit. That would, of course, be independent. So I think that's the core of it happening. And in terms of then, that also there is also a sense of independence already in like legislation for clubs with incomes over a certain amount, but I won't bore you on that. But I think that's how we can do it. And on the issue of sponsors too, I mean, it's becoming more and more of an expectation that everyone has understands their carbon footprint. That's and a lot of clubs are starting to come around to that now as well. And I think if you have that assessed or bona fide, I guess at least independently, then we can start to introduce that on a non-mass scale. I mean, we should start to be holding people to account generally for carbon footprints. Organisations should be publishing them, and we should then be able to rank them also or similar.
So there is a thing. There was a partnership that was made at the start of this season, I think, between EFL, the English Football League, and Green Code, which is like a sustainability consultancy company, basically advising clubs on how to be more sustainable. But I think it's very much on the clubs put themselves forward rather than it being a blanket thing that's done by all clubs. But I think coming back to one of the previous questions as well, I think a lot of it is about PR. A lot of it is about what looks good. And if you can make it so that the clubs, not shame the clubs necessarily, or that could be a step at some point, but also making it so that the clubs are like, okay, actually, maybe we're competing against other clubs for how sustainable we are season on season. Maybe there's a league table that's readily accessible. I mean, there is, like in Premier League one been done already. And it's a situation where that's a way of maybe engaging fans and being like, oh, we're not even in this table. Why are we not in this table? Why are we not doing our bit? And fans having that sort of ownership of that with their club, but also being like, oh, why are we bottom of the table? What can we do? And then coming back to what you're saying about having the clear information. Why isn't there a website or an app which says, these are all of the things that a club could be doing. We're only doing, X, Y, and Z of these things. What about all the other things we could be doing? If we're, say, Exeter City, maybe we could do the recycling bins. But if we're Manchester United, maybe we could, not get a chartered flight, to London. It's like these things that if they're in black and white on website which is readily accessible and promoted on a regular basis, it's like, it's not starting to not like you were saying about the Qatar World Cup. If this sort of information is being peddled, pumped, and is in everyone's consciousness, and they're like, oh my god, this is awful, then I think it does make a big impact. And I think you see the power of Rashford's campaign last season, how quickly that took off and how everyone knew about it, even people who didn't remotely interested in football. and then became interested in football off the back of it, because actually football can make social change. And seeing the England players continue to kneel despite their own fans booing them at times, I think, oh wow, that's powerful. So I think it has possibly, especially in this country, a unique place to make a big difference in a very, very quick way. I think it is a sort of, when the levee breaks type situation. It's just gonna go, and then it's just everyone's gonna get on the bandwagon, I think, and it's gonna be a situation where you don't want to be the last club to get on this bandwagon, because you're going to be looked back on and people are going to be like, why were we last on that?
I think the same applies to grassroots football as well, though. Like, clubs want to be the best club in that area. That is the competition. Like, you're not fighting.
The rivals and stuff.
Yeah, 100%. And the competition is to try and get more fans, or try and get that player to come to us, or whatever it is. And if there was some sort of competition or league or whatever that shows standing, that will make a massive difference, because they all don't want to be the bottom of that either. So like, if you could transfer that from the top down, or down up, or whoever, people don't ever want to be at the bottom.
It's really good.
I think we are going to have to wrap up here.
Yeah. Okay. Wrap it up. Well, just a final comment. Does something like that does exist, the Sport Positive League Table, but for Premier League clubs, and I do think that'd be great to have something like that for all clubs everywhere. So coming back to our wider question, who's responsible for embedding football in sustainability in football? Well, I think we have spoken about the need for national organisations to be stepping up, and I think we've spoken about though generally that there could be a need for everyone to be doing their bit. But of course, that things like competition could be great ways of encouraging that, and also of course talking about I think the need there. In terms of the help that everyone needs, I think we're talking about budget, and there's also a really useful mechanism in having information that is publicly available for people to be able to hold their clubs and others to account on. So that's us. Thank you very much for joining, and thanks. Thank you as well to our panelists, of course. Absolutely, really proud to have all these new voices here. Thank you to the university as well. Thank you to Ian Curtis. Thank you, Dan Hall. Wonderful people, almost say. Thank you very much.